There's this book by Barack Obama, Dreams from My Father. I don't know if you've read it. He even talks about their own estate when their father died. And of course, that was a very complex family, if you know his background and everything. And he talks about the way their estate was in court for years and years. Some people even died along the way while they were still fighting for those properties. And even by the time they were finalizing, so much money had been used in the legal fees, in all the processes. It was so tiresome. And when you think about those kind of scenarios, if it's something you can avoid by planning your estate, why would you not do that?
Once again, we've seen these situations. We hear them every day. Someone has built a business from a kiosk to 5 supermarkets, 10 supermarkets, and then they die, and then their children, in 3 years. Our life's work of 50 years, 40 years is gone in 3 years. So with estate planning, you're able to think about, what do I want for my business when I'm not there?
If you think you're married to someone, stop thinking about being married to that person and make sure you have the right documentation to prove that you're married to them. I think I find these conversations exciting because it's like, let's stop living on hope. The hope that if I was married today, I am hoping that if my husband died, my mother-in-law would still recognize that I was his wife. It doesn't work like that.
Now, the consequences of owning a property in common, in whatever shares, is that when one person passes on, the other remaining people, they do not inherit that person's share. That share goes to their own family.
Okay.
Right?
Own in common.
When you own in common.
Yes.
So if me and John own a property in 50-50, if I pass on, my 50% will not go to John. It will go to my family. So my family can come and claim the 50%. When you own it jointly, which I said, if it's jointly, it has to be specified. Include the word jointly. So when you're doing the documents of transfer, ensure that your lawyer writes in the transfer document that this ownership is jointly. Now, the consequences of owning jointly is that if one person dies, the surviving the person who has survived inherits this person's share, and it's automatic. You don't even have to go to court. You don't have to go to anywhere.
Hi tribe, I'm very excited about today's video, mostly because we are starting a new series on the Wealth Tribe called Estate Planning. And this series is very important because over the last couple of years, I've helped so many Wealth Tribers. I've set up money market funds, start investing in bonds, start investing in REITs, buy apartments, generally create a diversified investment portfolio. And one of the most frequently asked questions, especially by moms, is, so Agatha, you helped me set up this money market fund account. The question is, if I passed on tomorrow, how would my children benefit from my money market fund account? Or if I passed on tomorrow, or if my spouse passed on tomorrow, how would I pass on the portfolio of bonds that I have to my children? And so it's that's a very important question, because at the end of the day, we all have a lifespan, yes? At the end of the day, we all want to be in a situation where we dictate what happens to the assets that we've worked so hard to build, yeah? And that is why today I have 2 ladies on set. Both of them are advocates of the High Court, which is very exciting. And they're going to teach us estate planning. We are going to talk about everything that encompasses estate planning. Today's video is an introduction, but in the full series, we'll talk about trust funds, which you've asked me about so many times. Trust funds, wills, and everything in between. Joint ownership when it comes to your assets with your spouse or with your siblings or with your parents. And so, on set, again, I say I have 2 ladies, Wamuyu Kanyere, who is a familiar face at this point. If you're with Tribe and you don't know Wamuyu, you're playing, right? And so I'm going to give Wamuyu a chance to introduce, and when she's done, Olive will introduce herself. Wamuyu, karibu tena.
Asante, Agatha. It's always such a pleasure being on this platform. Again, for those who maybe are not familiar with my face, my name is Wamuyu Kanyere. I am an advocate by profession. I run together with my colleague a firm called Wanjiku and Kanyere Advocates. And I've been on this platform a couple of times. We've talked about many things. We've talked about purchase of properties. We've talked about purchase of apartments. And I've seen every day, I've received emails and WhatsApp messages from a lot of Wealth Tribers, just, taking into account everything that we have discussed. And I'm very proud of you all. Yeah. And I'm excited to have this discussion about estate planning.
Yes, Olive, Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very happy to be meet all the Welsh tribers, meet all of you. My name is Olive Wanjiku Mushoki. I am also an advocate of the High Court of Kenya by profession. I also run together with Wamuyu, Wanjiku and Kanyiri advocates, and I'm very excited. This is a topic that is very close to my heart, and I'm very excited to share the knowledge that we have about estate planning and to see what you guys will do with your estate after this video. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Agatha.
Wow, I think anytime as Kenyans we hear of the concept of estate planning, we always think the rich, right? You know, Kibaki's estate, Kenyatta's estate, and the like. So if you're wondering if this is a conversation that you should be watching, yes, you should be watching this conversation because they're going to be demystify all the myths, all the misconceptions, how we can do estate planning. And so to start us off, we want Olive to tell us what estate planning is because it's a nice way to introduce her to tribers by giving her a chance to speak first. So Olive, what is an estate? What is estate planning? Yes.
Thank you, Agatha. So I think the best place to start when we are talking about complex topics is to at least people to have an understanding of what we are talking about. And so I'd like to start first by defining what an estate is so that when we mention estate, you already know what it is we are talking about. So basically, an estate is everything you own or control at the time of your death. So when you're dying, your property, your money, your land, your bonds, if you have them, government bonds, your MMFs, all those form part of your estate. So it is what you will leave behind when you die. And then whenever we talk about assets, we talk about estates, there's something that people forget about a lot, and that is the issue of liabilities. So in addition to your assets, then you also have to consider what are your liabilities. So an estate is just basically your assets plus your liabilities. And to continue with this conversation and to give an introduction, when we talk about estate planning, I think the first thing we need to ask ourselves is, so I have died and I have an estate. What happens to my estate? So there are two ways that can go. The first is if you don't have an estate plan. So for instance, you don't have a will. In Kenya, we say that you have died intestate. You do not have a will, you do not have an estate plan, so you have died intestate. So when you die intestate, what happens is that there is a law in Kenya called the Law of Succession Act, and it governs how estates should be, how estates are supposed to be distributed after you die. So when you die intestate, the law of succession applies by default. It is a default law that applies if you die
to all of us.
If you die intestate, it is default. And the thing about it is that it gives a set order of how your assets will be distributed. And it's usually it will be to your spouse, to your children, to if you don't have children, to your parents, if you don't have parents, to your siblings, and on and on and so on and so on until relatives to a sixth degree. And if all those people don't exist, then your estate devolves to the state. So
it belongs to the government.
So the government will be like, hey, there's no one to claim this, so yeah, this is now ours. So that is what happens when you die intestate. Then when you die testate, so for instance, you've written a will, or we will discuss more tools of estate planning, but you've done all these things, then what you have set as a plan is what is going to happen. So if you've written a will, then your assets are going to be distributed according to your will. If you have a trust, then the trust will operate, all those things. So with this, then we can be able to define what estate planning is. So we understand what an estate is and we understand what happens. So estate planning is basically deciding how your assets will be distributed when you die, who will be in charge of this distribution, who will manage your estate, who will manage your assets, who will take them after you die. So that is basically it. It is when you're alive. So you don't make an estate plan when you're dead. Of course, you're not there. So when you're alive, it's when you decide, this is how I want my assets to be distributed. This is where I want to be in charge. This is how I want it to be done. Yeah, so that is basically an introduction to estate planning.
So now we understand. I've learned something new. Funny enough, I always thought that I understand estate planning. Of course, I don't understand it with depth like the two ladies would understand it because that is a day-to-day job. But I'd actually forgotten the bit about the liabilities. I always thought that my estate is my assets, yes. But now I understand that I also need to have a plan about if I die today and I have X number of debts, how are they going to be handled? Are they going to be handled from the assets that I own, or am I passing on the debts to my non-existent parents? So, okay, all right. So thank you, Olive, for that good introduction. So Wamoyo, maybe we can talk about why is estate planning important?
Okay. That's a very good question. And I think that's the whole reason why we are here, for you first to understand why this whole concept is important, and then now to take the steps that you need to take to, once you understand the importance. And I would say for me, the biggest thing is about, as we go through life, we really honor our choices. I mean, we want to go through life choosing how we want to live our lives. We want to know, yes, taking the driver's seat. You want to know where you work. You want to have a choice of where you work, where you live, how you use your money. You want, everybody just wants to. And in fact, when you even think about life generally and why we work so hard to earn a living, basically it's about choice. I want to have a choice of how I come from my house to this place. I want to have a choice of whether will I take the bus, will I take a matatu, will I drive myself, will I take an Uber. It's about choice. And that's why we work so hard, so that once you have enough money, you are able to make choices. You can make a choice of, I want my child to go to this school and not this school. I want my child to have this kind of life and not this kind of life. And now the thing with choices, yes, you are able to exercise all those choices when you are alive. And as you exercise those choices, there are certain things you accumulate as you do that. But now the thing what happens is that when you don't have an estate plan, or you haven't planned your estate, the moment you die, your choices die with you, right? So whatever it is that you have left behind, you kind of have left it into the hands of other people to make decisions. So you have left it either to your family or to the government or to the law, for the law to decide how we want to divide your estates.
And the truth is that when you leave your decisions to other people, they might not make decisions that you approve.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. So of course that is the blanket importance. But now under that we have so many other things. So for example, there's the issue of navigating complex family dynamics. I mean, if you live in this country, you're familiar with circumstances that happen. Mostly at burials, we have, all kind of people coming up at burials and saying, oh, I was a wife to this person. Oh, this is this person's child. Oh, and so much drama happens there. But now, if you want to avoid all that drama, you can plan your estate before you die. You can know, my family has there's some complexity in my family, whether it's multiple spouses, whether it's, multiple children and children who are even born out of wedlock. If you make an estate plan, and maybe these are people you really care about and you cared about during your lifetime, whether, that was a secret or not. If these are people you cared about during when you lived and you'd want them to still be taken care of once you pass on, I think the best way of going around that is, planning your estate, whether you'll do a will, whether you'll do a trust, whatever it is that you do. And the good thing with some of these things, it's that they can be confidential. You can make a will, and everything that is contained in that will is confidential. It's only known to you and probably the lawyer who assisted you draft the will and your witnesses. So even if you want to, maintain some of these kind of secrets or whatever, you can still keep them, but still provide for these people you care about, whether you want to acknowledge them openly as you live or not. Again, different families have different needs. For example, you'd find a family where children are not the same. Some children have some needs that others don't have. For instance, if say someone passes on and leaves, say a 40-year-old and happens to also live, say, a 6-year-old, these are two different people who have very different needs. For example, the 40-year-old, you probably have managed to take them through school, they have a job, they have an income, they have their life going on. So they don't really need you that much. But for the 6-year-old that you've left, they need to have provision to go through school, to set themselves up for, with their lives. So basically, these are two people with very different circumstances. But if you do not make choices that I want this to go to this child because of these and these needs, and this to go to this child because of these and these needs, if you leave it to the law will equalize. Yeah? Because when you go to the default law of succession act, most times you'll find that most scenarios where there are children, the law just says it will go to the children equally. But you see, when you give a 6-year-old the same as a 40-year-old, there's some injustice in there.
Yes,
So that's very important. Again, to help avoid family disputes. Agatha, let me tell you, if you're someone who cares about family, or family, it's something that means a lot to you, you'd hate to be in a succession court when the succession matters are being called. Because sometimes you get to witness the level of hostility that can arise between siblings, between parents and their children, between people and their in-laws. It gets really, really messy. And the reason why most times people get themselves into those kind of scenarios is because the person whose estate we are fighting about never made a plan.
Yeah.
So we don't know what they would have wanted. So everybody wants the best for themselves. And now we have families that, keep running from one court to another for years on end. Just to give an example, of course, this is a far-fetched one, but it's something that people will relate to. There's this book by Barack Obama, Dreams from My Father. I don't know if you've read it. He even talks about their own estate when their father died. And of course, that was a very complex family, if you know his background and everything. And he talks about the way their estate was in court for years and years. Some people even died along the way while they were still fighting for those properties. And even by the time they were finalizing, so much money had been used in the legal fees, in all the processes. It was so tiresome. And when you think about those kind of scenarios, if it's something you can avoid by planning your estate, why would you not do that?
Oh my God,
Right?
that's a very good example, especially when you say that so much money goes towards the legal fees. So it's like you're being given an option. It's either you take charge of your life and decide how your assets are going to be used, or the world will spend for you. And then when the world decides for you, it's so chaotic, and all of that money that you work for 40, 50, 60 years might just go to legal fees. I know you're lawyers, but I know when it comes to estate planning, a lot of when I was doing my research for this, like one of the tips I saw people sharing was that you'd see, if you do not decide what you want, like if you don't take the driver's seat in deciding what your estate, who your estate is going to be divided to, your lawyers are going to be happy. What is it? And so you can confirm that, yeah. So you're happy when the course takes 40 years.
Yes,
You're eating.
Yes, every time you needed to have an appearance, you're charging fees. Every time you need to make an application, you're charging fees. Time someone needs to make an objection, you're charging fees.
Yeah.
Again, the other importance is that people, as people go through lives, they have different desires and they have different, there are people that have very charitable desires. So for example, you'd want to take care of a child, say, who is not your own biological child. This is something you can do when you plan your estate. So you can provide for someone who is not your direct dependent. Because what happens with our law only recognizes, when it comes to now intestate succession, only mentioned that when you die without an estate plan, your estate is being inherited intestate. Intestate, that means you are going to follow the default laws. So the default law do not allow for
Adoption.
Yes, they do not allow for inheritance to people who are not related to you by blood.
Wow.
Right?
It's very important, yeah.
Yeah, so if you want to maybe take care of a child, you've been taking them through school and, something happens, you'd want to have them covered. Or even if you want to donate to maybe a charitable organization, you're able to do that when you do an estate plan. So that's just those are just some of the reasons. Maybe Olive can take us, we have other importances. Olive can take us through the other ones.
Just following up on what Wamuyu has said about children. For most of us, actually all of us who have children, they are a very core part of our lives. We care about them. We want them. We want what is best for our children. And so another importance of planning your estate is protecting young children, especially minors. So we've had instances where a couple, for instance, they go to a wedding, a rurashio, and they die. Unfortunately, they get into an accident, they die. And this couple had 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds. There was no estate plan, there was no will, there was nothing. We go about life like, it can happen to anyone else, but it can't happen to me. And then it happens to you, and then you have very young children. And there's no plan of what is going to happen to those children. You don't know whether these children need a guardian. if it's an 18-year-old, they can scrape through life. But a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, this is someone who's probably needs to go to school. This is someone who needs day-to-day care. So an estate plan, and we do this through wills. An estate plan can help you protect young children, and the way we do this is by appointing guardians. So you look around in your circle and you're like, I have a 3-year-old, I have a 4-year-old. If I die, unfortunately, and my spouse is not there, or I am a single parent and I die, I would want either my sister, or if the children have godparents, I would want my godparents to take care of their godparents to take care of them. I'd want my parents. So it gives you a choice on who is going to raise your child. Because when you die and you've not left any instructions, then first of all, families fight over children. So your mom says, no, I want them. Your aunt says, no, I want them. And then all of these people go, and the decision is left to the court. The court is going to decide who is the appropriate guardian for this child. So you see, the choice has been taken away from you. But if you plan, then you can say, I want my sister. And it makes it easier for this person to even go to court and say, look, here is a will that says I have been appointed the guardian, and so I am able to take responsibility over these children. So that's a very important part.
Yeah, and I wanted to add that, honestly, all of us, we know our families, right? And all of us, when you have a child, you know the person in your family who are like, God forbid, I would not want my child to end up with this uncle, or I would not want my child to end up with this sibling even, right? Because think of it this way: what if you have a sibling who is terrible, who is very terrible with financial planning, or who is struggling with drug abuse, for example? And so, yes, they're struggling with drug abuse, but you do not want them to take care of your child. So if you do not give the instructions, they will end up with that sibling, right? Or they'll end up with that uncle. So it's up to you to ask yourself, if it actually happened tomorrow, who do I want to take care of my children? And then I've also thought about, if you do not actively make a choice for your children, you're actually leaving them trauma, right? Because everybody has a story. Okay, not everyone, but a lot of us have a story of a day or a time in your life you lived with your terrible aunt, or a time you lived with your terrible uncle, or what happened to you with your sibling, right? And so if you're not deciding for your children, then you're deciding that here is your share of your trauma, instead of here is a trust that will educate you until you're 18.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Thank you. And then the other one we can talk about is family businesses. And I know I hope as part of our series, we can dedicate just one video where we just talk about businesses and planning for businesses. And once again, we've seen these situations. We hear them every day. Someone has built a business from a kiosk to 5 supermarkets, 10 supermarkets, and then they die, and then their children in 3 years. Our life's work of 50 years, 40 years is gone in 3 years. So with estate planning, you're able to think about, what do I want for my business when I'm not there? And sometimes even the people you're living, so if, for instance, if there's if it applies by default and then one of your children takes your business. So let me give a personal example. My parents are teachers. They have been teachers all my life. They are educators. And then when they retired, they started a school. I am a lawyer. I have 3 siblings. None of us are teachers. I don't know the first thing about running a school. And if my parents were to die without a plan for what the business would happen, even if I have the best intentions, even if I want the business, I don't know the first thing about running the business. So it is important, if you have a business, to think about, what do I want for my business? I want this business to continue providing for my children. What measures can I take? What protections can I put in place that this business is not wasted? So business planning is a very key part of estate planning. So if you have a business, start thinking, what will happen to this business what will happen to all the employees when I'm not there? Yeah. And then the final thing, the final point I'd like to talk about estate planning and importance is protection of your assets from mismanagement and misuse, just even to follow along with the business planning thing. Wamuyu has said, and we, even the people who are watching us, people who are in the business of creating wealth, we work very hard. We wake up every day and we work very hard. And if you don't make an estate plan, if you don't make a plan with the way we've said, anyone can take your property. And you don't know what this person is like. You don't know what are they business savvy? Are they financially able to continue with the estate. For instance, let me give an example. You have a child who's in university. You have all this wealth and you have a child who's in university. They're only 18. I'm not saying they're going to waste, but then can you imagine? Yeah, you have left probably an estate worth 10 million to a 18-year-old who's just got into campus. Or you don't make a plan, so it devolves to your parents and they are elderly, and then they have all of these things to manage. The likelihood of mismanagement, of misuse is very high, and estate planning helps to, sometimes you can even, with estate planning, you can even shield your assets from creditors. You can even see this beneficiary, the way I know them, if I give them this 1 million, in a year it will be gone. And I want them to be provided for. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to set up a trust and then make sure that every year they get a lump sum, so that it takes them for a very long time. And then Wamuyu mentioned something about secrecy. Very many of us do our investments in secret. You don't tell your parents, you don't tell your mother, you don't tell your son, and maybe you die single. No one knows that you had a property. You bought a plot in Joska, Kamulu. No one knows that it's there. And then there's no one to follow up on that property when you die. So then what happens is it will devolve to the state. So estate planning, imagine. Can you imagine? It is very, very bad for all the things you worked for because you didn't plan for them, because you didn't say where they are. One day you die, there's no one to follow. Probably that plot would have benefited someone in your family. Or you can say, I don't want anything to do with my family, so I'm going to leave all of my property to my best friend. The way my family dynamics is set up, I don't talk to those people. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give my estate to, a children's home.
So estate planning is also applicable even if you want to do things in spite. Like, right? Like, me and my family, we don't talk. So why would they benefit from, or they never contributed? Or I've had people say how your parents died, you were left as an orphan, and none of your parents, your aunties or your uncles contributed towards your education. But then now that you're a lawyer in this big city, and they assume, first of all, right, and they assume you have all these millions, you pass on and then they now want to be part of. For me, never. I want my estate to make sure that every single coin that I own goes to the rightful people that I want to benefit from my hard work. Yeah. And I think the other thing when we were talking about this conversation, it's something I had never thought about, but when you mentioned children with special needs or sickly parents, right? Where, obviously, things, if a child has special needs, like they're disabled, they have autism, nobody is going to love your child the way you love them. Even your own sibling, even your own parents, they will never, most of the time, they'll never extend the kind of love that you have for your child. And for me, it was like, this is such a beautiful thing, because then if you set up something like a trust, which we'll talk about in detail some other time, then it means that if you have a child like that one, like you said, you can create a plan where every month there's a specific deposit that goes towards them or to whoever you've leave them in charge, as opposed to finding them in the streets 5 years later. I found that to be very sad. Or even a very sickly parent, right? Nobody is going to take care of a sickly parent like you would. So take matters into your own hands. I think that is the most important thing. Yeah, and don't leave people with chaos and trauma and disputes. Like, how about you have a better transition?
Yeah, and maybe Agava, just before we wrap up that bit of the conversation, maybe also to mention something about we've had so many stories. I'm sure everyone has had at least a story or two about a spouse, a man who passes on, and then the family comes and disinherits the spouse. So we've had so many cases, and now, okay, onto this. Of course, I'm going to bring in another discussion of the whole concept of marriage and how marriages are recognized in Kenya. And just to mention, of course, I'm deviating a bit, but I think this is important to mention that as per our current law, all marriages have to be registered, whether it's a customary marriage. So even if you've done the customary, the traditional rites, you've done the rurasho and all that, it's important that you get your marriage registered. We are now having, under our current law, the whole issue that we used to have about cohabitation, presumption of marriage. There are so many challenges with that. So for anybody who wants their marriage, who are keen on having whatever union they are in recognized as marriages, it's very important they get it registered. Because now we've seen all these wives who are usually left, and because there wasn't a formal union, the in-laws just come and take over everything. And these people are left destitute. And some of them don't even have the finances to go to court and start pursuing things. And even if they go to court, if they don't have the paperwork to prove that they were spouses, they easily end up being disinherited. And we know so many in our societies that have been disinherited once their husbands passed on. So maybe that's just the other bit I wanted to include in before we wrap up this bit of the conversation.
Yes. So if you think you're married to someone, stop thinking about being married to that person and make sure you have the right documentation to prove that you're married to them. I think I find these conversations exciting because it's like, let's stop living on hope. The hope that if I was married today, I am hoping that if my husband died, my mother-in-law would still recognize that I was his wife. It doesn't work like that in the court of law, right? It's like we are using facts and not hope. And so now that we need to get practical, right? So what tools, right? Because we were talking about estate planning. So what should we do exactly? So what tools are we meant to use to do estate planning? Maybe Wamuyu can take us through the first three.
Okay. So there are various tools that you can use in the bid to manage your estate, and I'm going to discuss three of them. And the first one, which is the one that most people are familiar with, is wills.
Yes.
So wills are basically just an intention, communication of your intentions of what will happen to your estate, what will happen to your children. Olive has mentioned that you can appoint a guardian. People also talk about how they would want what they would want done with their bodies after they're dead. Some people want to be buried, others want to be cremated, others want their bodies to be donated for research purposes. I mean, we have it's not very common in Kenya, but of course, people, you're able to make those wishes. So basically, wills is the most basic thing, and of course, in the next video of this series, we are going to discuss wills more in depth, because there's so many things also there. You can make an oral will, which is not very recommended. You can make a written will, which we recommend. There are certain guidelines that you have to adhere to, so that your will is recognized. There are certain steps you have to take to ensure that you come up with a watertight will that will not end up being challenged in court. So basically, the will is like the simplest and most common tool that people can use to plan their estate. Just sit down with your lawyer, just have a list of everything you own. And I know it helps because now you're able to remember even the things that you may have invested in and forgotten about it. You're able to consolidate, you're able to regularize things. For example, if it's a property you bought somewhere, you never really got the title, you're able to follow up, so that as you make the will, it's intact. So obviously that's wills, of which we'll discuss more in details in our subsequent videos in this series. The second one is joint ownership. Now, joint ownership is whereby you own a property with someone, but jointly. And I'm using the word jointly very intentional, because there are various ways of owning property as two or more people, which is not okay. So maybe just to give it some bit of more explanation, when you own a property, or when you own, say, even a bank account as two or more people, but this mostly applies to property. When you own a property as two or more people, there are two forms of ownership. One, it's called ownership in common, and two, joint ownership. Sometimes you use the word joint ownership to mean, we just use it as a blanket blanket word, but it's a distinct form of ownership: joint ownership and ownership in common. Now, what are the differences? When you own something with someone jointly, one, it has to be specified in the title document. Okay? So if you're owning land with someone jointly, you have to specify that Agatha Wanjiru, Monica Wamuyu, and Olive Wanjiku jointly. You have to include the word jointly for it to be recognized as joint ownership.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah. That's a very important thing.
The reverse, where you just put names and don't specify, don't say anything.
Yeah.
The assumption is that you own that property in common. And what in common means is that everyone has their own distinct share in that property.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
So basically, if maybe I own land with another person called John. So Monica and John. In the title, there are two names, Monica, John, full stop. The assumption is that we own that property in common with John, and each of us has distinct shares. And when those shares have not been specified in that title document, then the assumption is that we own 50-50.
Okay,
right?
Go to ask that.
So the assumption is that we own 50-50. But others, sometimes when people own and this happens commonly when people own things as a chama, or they buy things as a chama, you just find a title that has 9 names and nothing. So basically, it's important to specify if you're keen on whose share, who owns what share. So if, for example, your contribution is like 70%, indicates that this person's contribution is 70, the share is 70-30, or it's 40-60, or it's 50-50. Always be keen when you're owning property with other people. If you made the bigger contribution, then let it be specified in the title that your share is bigger than the other person. Now, the consequences of owning a property in common in whatever shares is that when one person passes on, the other remaining people, they do not inherit that person's share. That share goes to their own family.
Okay.
Right?
Own in common.
When you own in common.
Yes.
So if me and John own a property in 50-50, if I pass on, my 50% will not go to John. It will go to my family. So my family can come and claim the 50%. When you own it jointly, which I said, if it's jointly, it has to be specified. Include the word jointly. So when you're doing the documents of transfer, ensure that your lawyer writes in the transfer document that this ownership is jointly. Now, the consequences of owning jointly is that if one person dies, the surviving the person who has survived inherits this person's share, and it's automatic. You don't even have to go to court. You don't have to go to anywhere. You just go to the land registry and say, I own this property with this person jointly. They have died. This is the death certificate. And their name is removed from the title document such that only your name is left.
Yeah.
So they're it's very important that people understand those two concepts. Ownership in common and ownership jointly. We are not recommending either because, again, we're saying it depends on circumstances, whether you want to own property with someone in common or jointly. So for instance, even when it comes to families, depending on what the dynamics are or depending on what you'd want to happen if you are to pass on, that's what makes you decide, do you want it to own it in common or do you want to own it in jointly? So for the purposes of estate planning, we are talking about joint ownership in the sense that if probably own a property with your spouse, and this is a long-term spouse, and it's not something that you intend to divorce in the next couple of years or anything. Like, you can foresee this being a union up to the end of it. It will be more important for the ownership to be joint. And the good thing is, if maybe you have only one property, maybe by the time you're dying, you only have like just one property.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to keep dragging your spouse to court to go do succession for one property. So if you register it jointly, it's easy for them when you die. They just go to the land registry, they show that the death certificate, and the property becomes theirs absolutely. So they don't have to go through the whole succession process.
Yeah, so it's like this point is very connected to the marriage situation, right? So it's a way of protecting your spouse, where if I passed on today, I don't want my family or anybody to drag you to court claiming that this is our apartment, that 50% should now go to them. So it's like it's like the way every time we do a video, we say this is your action point. So this is one of those action points where if you're owning any property jointly, because we clearly we use that word loosely, I've also learned today. Wow, I'm shocked. I'll go and check. So one assignment we are giving you, if you belong to a chama, a lot of women do, right? If you belong to an investment group, if you're married, if you own a property with a friend, because I do own a property with a friend, right? So if you own a property with a friend, go and check that documentation. What does it say? So that as soon as now, because now we are going to start estate planning, you decide you take charge of what would happen. Because imagine if you own a property with a friend, right? And you didn't intend for them to own.
Yeah, you are shared. And then, if it's written jointly, they will own. A family can help.
But there's nothing your family can help.
So people need to be very deliberate when they're doing the transfer process about that particular bit.
Go check your documents. And if it's hard for you to read those documents, Okay, all right.
So the last tool I'm going to discuss is a tool called Power of Attorney. And I'm going to discuss these together with another tool called guardianship. Now, power of attorney, many of you might have heard about power of attorney. Yeah. But basically, a power of attorney is the person who is giving the power of attorney is called a donor, and the person who is given the power of attorney is called a donee. So basically, you are donating the power of attorney to somebody else, and the implication is that that person you have appointed as your donee kind of steps into your shoes as far as legal transactions are concerned. So, and then we have two types of power of attorneys. It can be a specific power of attorney where you're appointing someone to do a specific task, right? For instance, a while back we had cases of, if someone maybe wants to travel abroad and they have a lot of pending transactions over here, and then don't want to have to travel back every time they're needed to do something, you can now appoint someone to be your power of attorney, such that while you are there, this person can sign all your legal documentation as if it's you who is signing. And again, we're saying it can either be specific for a specific transaction or specific reason, or it can be general. Now, that one, at the time of appointing someone as your power of attorney, of course, you have to be an adult and you have to be of sound mind. You have to be able to make the decisions or do the actions that this person you're donating to can do. In conjunction with that, there's also a concept called guardianship. Now, guardianship usually applies when someone gets challenges, mental challenges, which makes it difficult for them to make decisions for themselves. So the law recognizes that you can only make certain transactions when you are of sound mind. The moment you have been declared to be of sound mind, for one reason or the other, either it's whatever kind of challenges, and of course we get these a lot when, our parents are growing older, they start experiencing some of these challenges. Sometimes it's dementia, sometimes it's just loss of memory, sometimes it's, whatever condition it is. When that happens, I think it's important for families to be deliberate about that particular scenario, because if you leave it like that, first of all, that person is not authorized to make decisions for themselves or to do transactions for themselves. And so they can also not even plan their own estates. Yes. So it's important to if such a scenario were to happen to maybe a parent or a friend or someone you would care about, there's a process called guardianship where you approach the court and you tell the court that this and this loved one has had this and this condition, and this is the medical report showing that this is the condition that this person has. And by virtue of this, they're not really able to make decisions or do transactions that are necessary for them to continue with life. So the court appoints the person who makes that application, appoints that person as a guardian, and of course the court checks. It wouldn't just appoint anyone to be a guardian. The court has to be satisfied that, one, you're related to this person, or you have the best interest of this person, such that when you are appointed as the guardian, whatever it is that you do, you're doing it for the best interest of this person.
Yes.
And that helps, because then once you have that paperwork done, it's easier to even take care of these people if it's medical bills, because now you have the power to, if you need to dispose of an asset, or if you need to make some investments on behalf of this person to get income to continue sustaining them. I think that's another tool that it's not mostly talked about. I think people usually don't know what to do in that kind of scenario when that happens to their loved one. But yeah, that's the process. You're allowed to approach the court and, apply for guardianship, which now gives you the powers to step into that person's shoes as far as managing their estate or managing their property is concerned.
That's important, because I can foresee a situation where somebody is very elderly and they're unwell and they're struggling with medical bills, yet they own all these assets, and everyone is seated by the sideline saying, I don't have money to help, right? So it's nice to learn this thing. Okay, so Olive, which other tools can we use to plan our estate?
The other tools I'm going to talk about. So I'll start with one that is it's becoming popular now, and many people are talking about it. And
why do you think it's a thing now? Because I've actually also realized that very many well-tribers are asking me about trust, right? That is what we're talking about. Why is it popular now? Why were we not talking about it 5 years ago?
I think one of the things that has made it popular is, for a long time, trusts and trust funds have been depicted as tools of the wealthy. So you hear things like, oh, I am a trust fund baby. I cannot wait to be a trust fund baby, and then you think, oh my God, they have to have 10, 100 million to set up a trust because I want. So for a long time, it has been a preserve of the wealthy. And in pop culture, that is how, especially pop culture has really movies. They've really made us think, I need to be very wealthy to have a trust. But now people are realizing, actually, I don't need to be that wealthy. And then the other thing is the understanding, and we'll talk more about this, but people are now starting to understand with a trust, the good thing about trust, especially if you set them up when you're leaving, they bypass probate. So people are starting to realize, oh, okay, I have a will, but I don't want my children to suffer before my will is enforced. So I'm going to set up a trust fund so that they're taken care of. So I think that's why they have become popular. And now there's a new law governing them, governing trust. There's an amendment. There has been amendments. The process of setting them up legally has been simplified more. It's simpler now. So people are starting to wake up to the benefits of trusts. But I'd like for us Wealth Tribers to understand what trusts are. So essentially, a trust is a legal arrangement that will involve three parties. So there's the donor, or we use these terms interchangeably. So you'll hear someone say a donor, another will say a founder, another will say a settler. So if you interact with they are also corporate trustees now, so you'll hear them use those words interchangeably. So there's the first party, the donor, founder, settler. Then there's an intermediary, kuna mtu katikati, who is called the trustee. An individual, some people are choosing to go with corporate trustees, or you can choose an individual. And then the third party is a beneficiary. So what happens is that in the trust is that the donor, the founder, takes property, takes asset, takes money, and gives the trustee to hold.
And so in this case, the donor is like someone like me who wants to build the trust.
You want to build the trust. So you, Agatha, you identify a trustee. There's a beneficiary, supposing you have maybe a special needs child. So, and you want them to be provided for while either after you die or while you're living. So you put a trustee in the middle. They hold this property, these assets, on behalf of, the legal word is in trust of. And trust is the whole relationship is based on good faith. It is based on trust. That is why a trustee is called a trustee, because essentially you're holding property that is not yours for the benefit of someone else. So the trustee will hold whatever it is that the donor has given them, and then there will be rules. We will usually draft deeds. So the deeds will give the rules of how this trustee should handle the property. So it's not the trustees. If they're just in a position of trust, I trust you, hold this thing for my beneficiary and give it to them. So there'll be rules. You'll say, like how trust fund babies are born. You give a trust, and then you say, when this person reaches 25, give them 1 million. Or you say,
they finish university,
give them 50 million. If they struggle before if they want to take a gap year and go and travel in backpacking in Europe, give them 5 billion. So you see, that's how it works. So that's basically how trusts are formed. That is essentially it. So I want us to remember, whenever we think about trust, that it's a tripartite relationship. There are three people, and it's a legally recognized relationship. The thing about trust is that they are very versatile tools, and they offer very huge benefits such as privacy. We will talk about wills, but you can keep your will private when you're alive. You can keep it private, but once you die, your will becomes a public document. And when we were discussing this with Wamuyu, she was telling me, you remember the whole Gachagua case, and everyone, the lawyer was in court. So you have been left this and this and this and this by so and so. So the wills can become public documents, but trusts offer a lot of privacy. So if you want, for instance, if there's we know our families. We know there are some families who will see nikiekwa kwa will, and then they'll be like, I have not been given enough. Then now you start fighting. We know our families, we know our dynamics. So trusts offer a lot of privacy, because essentially the beneficiary has no business in what you're doing as a donor. They really have no business. They can't come and tell you, now you are setting for me a trust fund, you have to give me 5 million. No, it's between the donor and the trustee, and it's the prerogative of the donor on how they want their trust to be run. So they will draft a trust deed, and they will pick good trustees, and then now the trustees will be in charge of ensuring that the beneficiaries get the benefit that they're supposed to do. And to underscore this again, because it's important, trusts bypass probate. But that depends. Probate is that process of going to court, whether by will, where you go to court and then the will is enforced. So trust will bypass probate, but it depends. And I think I should have started with this. When we think about trust, there are two types of trusts. So there is a testamentary trust. It's formed in a will. So you can draft a will and create a trust within the will. And that's what most people will do, especially if you have minor children. These children will not own the property in their name. So you create a trust within your will where you say, I am appointing, maybe it's my executor, they will hold this property in trust until my child turns 21, 25, and then now the property can devolve to the children. And then there is a second type of trust. It's called a lifetime or a living trust. So this is a vehicle you set up when you're alive, and you transfer the property in your lifetime. And the reason why this is good is we've said that it bypasses probate, because the properties are not in your name anymore. So when it's time to go to court, even if it's a succession, even if it's intestate, which we do not recommend, there are properties that are already in the trust that do not fall as part of your assets. But that is for a living trust. And we will talk more about trust in a follow-up video, but I wanted to bring up that difference between trust created by a will and trust created in your lifetime, and the transferring for property in your lifetime.
Yeah, so for sure we will have a whole video talking about trust, because it's very important. It will be very practical about it. But tell me if I understand this. So it's what you're saying is she talked about a will. So a will, it's not effective when you're alive, right? It's just a document, right? And then when you die, it can become a public document, and it can be a very embarrassing thing, because now, just like the Gachagua thing, we know who owns what, right? But then a trust, even if I pass on, both when I'm alive and when I pass on, it remains a private document.
It is a private
So
document.
if you don't want your
problematic uncle to know what you're doing with your property, if you don't want your problematic sibling, because essentially what happens is that whoever is provided for in the trust will just be getting their benefits from the trust and the trustees. So there's no this person who's coming to say, okay, I need to see how is this working. You can't go to a corporate trustee and then you start demanding, I need to know how this donor, how did they reach to this decision. That is not your prerogative. Yeah, it's very private. So it offers very good privacy. If you're a private person and you want to keep your estate and your assets private, or your family dynamics need privacy, then it is a very good tool to consider.
But do you know how many problems that thing solves? Because how many children have we seen whose parents have passed on, and their parents had a lot of property, but they never got the education, simply because your problematic uncle decided that huyu alikuwa dada yangu, and so therefore it is by default that this should have been my property. And it's like, so imagine your problem. Oh my God, I'm so happy, because I'm just imagining your problematic uncle is sitting there and thinking, so these kids are still getting an education, and I do not know how they're getting an education. That solves so many problems. I can't wait for us to have a whole conversation about it. Okay, what else can we use?
And then the other tool we can use is beneficiary designations or beneficiary nomination. This applies where, for instance, if you have a pension plan or you have a life insurance policy, they will usually allow you to name someone who is going to take over, who is going to take your whatever the policy. And the good thing about beneficiary designations is that they only take effect when you die. So no one can go now, oh, I've been named a beneficiary, give me my money, as long as that person is alive. And they're also a very good tool, because as much as we are encouraging people to draft wills, and wills are very important, and they will be a basic. I like to say it's a cornerstone of a good estate plan, a will. But the thing about wills is that they do go to court, and it will take some time, even if it's very unproblematic, even though it's not challenged. It will still take some time, and you want your people to be provided for while they enforce your will. So a beneficiary designation is something you can consider. So if you have an insurance policy, name your spouse, name your child, so that when you die, they can take the property, even as they wait for the other things you've left for them in a will to come to effect. So that is another tool. And then the final tool, the two final tools are...
Before we talk about the final tools, when Wamuyu and I were having a conversation about, I think it's a video about like it was about tips to make sure that your investments go to the right people. You mentioned that the probate process, or when somebody passes on, can take a very long time, right? And so I remember saying that you said something to do with it can even take 7 months, at least 7 months or so. And so what Olive is saying is, if you passed on today, even if you have a will and fine, people are going to go to court and eventually those properties are going to end up with your children, between day 1 and 7 months, what are your children going to eat? Right? You need to think about
And even the burial expenses. Yeah.
Actually,
We have people fundraising for days on end.
And this person has money in a bank account where...
And that's ethical. So,
oh yeah. I actually know of a lady whose the husband passed on, and she had to go to court to request the court to allow her to withdraw money from her husband's account in order to feed her children. It's like, what is this?
And it's such a process. And banks, you don't have to not keep all the money, and in 20 minutes you've been given the order. Kind of a process. So
yeah.
Yeah, the more we talk about this, the more we see why it's important to do estate planning. I think we push it at the back of our minds, where we're like, yeah, it's not a must, I do this, right? But the more you talk about it, the more you realize that by not doing it, you're choosing chaos.
yeah, that's a good tagline. You're choosing chaos.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you can talk about the last two.
The last two, the one I talked about, I mentioned it, business succession planning. I want to urge all business owners. You need to think about what is going to happen to your business when you die. You need to make plan. Do I have a business partner? Let me say I'll leave my business to so like, for instance, if I were to decide my business succession planning, I can say, Wamuyu is my business partner. We work well. Let her take my business, and then maybe give the benefits to my children in a certain way. So you need to make plans, because the thing about businesses is they don't only serve you. They also, you have employees.
Yes.
And we've seen I remember there was a time I was visiting a certain business. I was just visiting to buy something, and I found them the employees so downcast. We were with my mom. My mom is a very curious person, so she asked them, what is happening? They told us, where mdosi amekufa. Hatujui, we don't know what is going to happen to us. And it happens that if you don't make a plan, your employees suffer, and all the work that you have put in that business, it can go down the drain. So as I said, I hope we're going to have a session where we can talk about it more in depth, but just to make people start thinking, start asking yourself these questions and making a plan. Then the final tool people can use are things we call gifts in law. And gifts, it's just that, zawadi, I give this to you. There are some people who are watching us who are like, me already know. I want my son James to get my property in Murang'a. I want my daughter in Kiambu, Mary, to get my property in Kiambu. I know what I want. And the problem that people make, the mistake that people make, is you call these people and then you tell them, hi, wewe James, nimekupea Kiambu. You, Mary, I've given you the property in Murang'a. And then that story is never discussed again. There's no formalization of that gift, because it needs to be formalized. And then what happens is, even if the person you've given that property goes and starts developing it, they start farming, and then you die, and then they decide, oh, I want to sell this property, I want to take a mortgage on this property. Then they go to the title, it's still in the name of the father. And you have been using this business and now you have to start the succession process, because you can't use a title that is not in your name. So if you've decided, I want to gift my children things, I want to gift them a property, formalize it. Go to a lawyer, do the transfer, and let the title come out in the name of the child, whoever it is you're giving. And it's a very, because some people are old and they're like me, I don't, I already know what I want. So let me just give it to them right now to malizane. So if you decide to go that route, don't just call your family for a meeting and tell them, oh, now I've given you this and this. No, actually, once you have done that, once you have decided who's taking what, formalize it. Let the title come out. If it's a property, let it come out in the name of that child. So those are the tools I had to discuss.
Oh, those are we have so many, right? So many we haven't. We know we will dig more into trusts. A lot of us are familiar or have heard of the concept of wills. Joint ownership, you've literally blown my mind. I'm like, today when I go home, I need to read all my documents, anything that I have in joint ownership, beneficiary delegations and guardianship. That was a really awesome one. Power of attorney, because I think all of us just hear of power of attorney in movies. You know, there are some things you hear in movies and you're just like, that's for the rich, right? Now you understand that these are tools accessible to you. I think that's the most important thing about these conversations. It's making wealth tribers and even Kenyans in general understand that these things are available to you. Like, there's so much suffering that we go through simply because you didn't call a lawyer for, a 5-minute consultation and they give you the right information. Okay, all right. So now, practically, how do we get started with our estate plan? And Olive will take us through that first, yeah.
Okay, so now
today, Wamuyu, you have to accept you as spectator. No problem.
I'm talking to a wealth triber who has watched this video and now they have decided today I want to take charge of my life. And you're wondering, I know all this information, where do I start? So the first place to start, and if you come to me, if you want me to help you with an estate plan, I will ask you, what are we planning?
Yeah.
So the first plan that the first place to start is assess all of your assets and liabilities, all of them. And it serves to inventory them, write them down. Say, when I was 20, there's a property I bought in, where is that title, by the way? Write it down. There's an MMF, I own shares. There's a chama, we bought property together. Write all of it serves to write them down so you have an inventory. That is the first place to start. My mom says, I will mention her a lot. She says, take stock of your life. You know how a shopkeeper goes and nafanya stock? Take stock of your life. Figure out what are your assets, what are your liabilities. And that's the first place.
I'll cut you short because this is a very common thing. The first thing, I'm a financial coach, right? That's what I do on a day-to-day basis. The first thing I ask people when they come to me for financial coaching is, what do you own and why? And I can promise you 9 out of 10 people don't know the answer to that question. What do you own and why, right? They don't know. And that is how I take people through the process of calculating their net worth. So that's what you're describing. It's like it's calculating your net worth. And so how you calculate your net worth is you make a list of all your assets, everything she's mentioning, shares, bonds, money market funds, property, land, everything that you own. Some people even add gold jewelry, right? Yeah, anything that you consider for you is an asset. Your car, right? If you consider it as an asset, it is an asset. Or if it's something that can value rather, right? It is an asset. So you make a list of all your assets. And then after that, you make a list of all your liabilities. And your liabilities can be debt or any arrears that you have. So if you have rental arrears, school fees arrears, a credit card debt, all those arrears that you have and any other form of debt, you make a list. And then let's assume that you made a list of your assets and it added up to 5 million, yeah? And then you made a list of your liabilities and it added up to 3 million, right? So your net worth at the end of the day is 5 minus 3. So your worth, if you are a business, is 2 million. And let me tell you the number of people who are shocked when you take them through this process because they're like, oh, I didn't know this. People just walk around with plots in Kamulu and another one in Ukambani and money in bank account. Do you know there are people whom I take them through the process of calculating their net worth and then a week later they come, by the way, nilisahau kukwambia kuna ploti mama yangu alinipatia. Like, what? So imagine if that person died.
The confusion that you raise.
If they have no clarity, what about
the people you're leaving behind?
Yeah, so the first part of how to get started with your estate plan is, what are your assets and liabilities?
What is it? What am I planning?
What am I planning? Yeah.
Then the next step is, so I want to talk about this in two ways. So there's the preparation part and there's the action. So we start with preparing. Before you now get into the action, you prepare. So step 1 in preparation is assessment of assets and liabilities. Then step 2 is you need to figure out what your estate planning objectives are. You don't just start planning an estate and you don't know what the objectives are. And some of the questions you can ask yourself is, who are my beneficiaries? The other question can be, what really is my financial situation? You know what you've said, what is my net worth really? Because I'm not just going to plan for things that are not there. So what is my financial situation? And the other question you can ask yourself is, this estate plan, how will it impact the people I will leave it to? And we've said, and we will keep repeating, we know our families. You can make an estate plan, and then because you didn't think about it, and you didn't have a proper objective, it becomes very difficult because of how our families are. And we love them, but sometimes they are problematic. So you need to figure out, how will this impact these people? Another question you can ask yourself is, how long do I want to provide for my beneficiaries? Do I just want to give them an asset? Will you take the property? You figure out what you will do with it. Me, I'm done. I've given you. Or do you want my estate plan to benefit my descendants from my children, their children, their children's children? So those are some of the questions you need to ask yourself as you figure out what your objectives are. And once you have the answers to those questions, then now you can start doing the action. And the action is, as we said, the first one is draft a will.
Yes.
I will keep saying this, and I will say it again. A will is the cornerstone of a good estate plan, because you can set up all these other things, but you need to have a will, because we said it's more than just assets. It's also your children. It's also you yourself. What do you want to happen to your body when you die? So draft a will. And then the other action you can take is decide who will be in charge of executing this plan. Don't just make an estate plan and then you're like, let me leave it to my sister. She will figure it out. Decide, and because the responsibilities that are attached to the people who execute your estate plan are very huge responsibilities in law and even in logically. If you're leaving people to your children, you have to make a proper decision. So decide who it is, and it is important that you communicate with these people. For instance, if you're appointing someone as a guardian, don't just tell them, don't just say, oh, now in my will I am appointing my sister. Communicate with your sister. What if she doesn't want to take care of your children?
Oh my God. Do you know that is something I've experienced recently, where it's not that big of a deal, but someone was relocating, right? And they had to leave their child, and then they'll come for the child later. And so she just made an assumption that the sister will take care of the child. And when she was 2 days before she left, the sister told her, no. What? Why the hell did you assume that I was going to take care of your child? So yes, it's very important to
Communicate. If it's executors of your will, tell them, so I'm drafting a will, I have engaged a lawyer, but I want you to know that I want you to manage my estate when I'm gone, so that you also figure out what these people want. You figure out whether they are capable. Because you'll tell them and someone will say, actually, I feel like I don't want that responsibility. Then it helps you to find someone else who can actually take on the responsibility. And then now the third action is figure out your tools. What tools do you want to use? We are recommending, the first one is a will. But then look at what you're there. For most people, a will serve the purpose. It will serve the purpose because for most of us, our estates are very straightforward. They are not complex. But there are some of us whose estates are very complex, then they are not straightforward. And also another objective is, do I really want my children to, do I really want, what about the probate process? What will be happening in the probate process? So those will help you to consider your tools. So if according to estate planning objectives, a will is enough, you can just draft a will and rest in peace knowing I have made the choice. If according to estate planning objectives, like for instance, you want to provide for your generations over and over, from your children to your children's children, you might want to consider a trust, because then a trust it's a perpetual thing. It continues, and as long as it's being managed properly, it will continue to serve your generations for as long as possible. So if your estate planning objectives are, I want my children to be provided for forever, I have a sickly person who will never be able to manage their estate, so there's the need for this person to have a trustee. So you can consider a trust. Consider beneficiary designations. And then what Wamuyu said, joint ownership. Go look at that, the title for your matrimonial home. the one that you live with your wife, look at how it looks like. If there's need for that title to also include your wife or your husband, include them. And then the other ones, gifts. If you have given people gifts, then formalize the gifting. So that's the action. So again, preparation, action, and the action involves communication, and it also involves the tools. And then now after you have done the action, I want to urge people to consult experts. I know there's someone seated somewhere and they're like, I can do this, I can DIY, I can do it myself. And I am not doubting people's abilities to do it, but
To some extent.
yes, what I am urging is consult experts. As lawyers, me and Wamuyu, when you come to me with an estate plan and you tell me this is what I want to do, I will tell you, well, there was a case I had and there was this loophole. So maybe you might want to restructure it differently because of what I have seen. And we have the law, we understand the law, we understand the implications, we understand the implications of some of these responsibilities. So when you come to me and you tell me I want to appoint so-and-so as my trustee, I will tell you these are the these are the responsibilities of a trustee. Do you think this person can handle it? And then to finalize, the last two is organize and store documents. My people, let us, if you have, Wamoyo has said there's a property you bought, I don't know which year, you don't even know where that title is. And the beneficiaries will need it. They will need it to go to court for instance, if it's a will. Organize the documents, figure out where they are. If you're not sure about the status of a property, conduct a search. Some people have bought a property. You have never stepped on that property in 30 years. What is the status of that property? Can it pass on? Is there someone who's there who's squatting and might end up taking your property because of maybe adverse possession? Consider the status of and then store your documents. You can store them in a bank, in a safe deposit box, or you can store them with your advocate. And then you tell your beneficiaries, all the documents, when I die, ziko kwa wakili, muende atawapatia. And then the final thing is, I talked about communication. So communicate your plan, even with your beneficiaries. For instance, if you're planning to leave a business to your child, you need to start grooming that child. Because now you're going to leave them a business. They have no idea about how, if you think this is a person I can trust to handle my business when I'm gone, can you start grooming them? Show them the ropes. Show them how you do the business. Instill in them the importance of keeping this business running. I think that is also something else that people forget. We don't instill in our beneficiaries the importance of the property that we are leaving to them. You work so hard and then you're like, they'll figure it out. But they need to understand what you're leaving to them. They need to understand this is for your benefit. They need to understand you can't squander this. And then the final thing is, you have all these things. You need to review and update your plan regularly. And this especially applies if so for instance, I make an estate plan, I'm 29. Possibly I will live for another 50 years. Between now and 50 years, so many things can change. If at 50, the same estate plan I had is what I had when I was 30, there's a possibility I'm married. There's a possibility I have children. There's a possibility I have acquired new assets that I did not include, because when I was 30, maybe I had 3 properties. Now I have 10 and I have not included them in the estate plan. So there is importance, especially if you go through a big life change. You get married, you have children, and someone you had appointed, maybe you appointed a guardian, they have died before you. You need to replace them. Yeah.
This cannot be a passive thing.
It can't be, now I am done. Anyway, Maliza, no, you have to go back to your estate plan and always remember your objectives when you are making this plan. Have the objectives changed? And if the objectives have changed, then there might be need for me to change my plan. There might be need for me to update it. I have acquired a new dependent, but when I was 30, I wasn't paying school fees for someone. Now I'm paying school fees for someone. What is going to happen to them? So I'm urging, even if right now you already have an estate plan, maybe there's someone we're talking to and they already have a will, they already have a trust, it is important to review it so that you see where I am right now and what that estate plan is like, that it would work. It doesn't fail.
Yeah. And even going back to, even if you DIY'd your estate plan, can you at least ask yourself, if I die tomorrow, will it work? So you need to consult an advocate in order for you to actually know whether it would work. And when I was researching about estate planning, are you done with the process? Yeah. So when I was researching about estate planning, I found this statistic that said that actually for most people, their estate dies by the third generation, and it's mostly because they did not communicate and they had no plan. And it makes sense because if my parents, for example, worked very hard, right, and they had all this wealth, I saw my parents work hard and saw them toil, and sacrifice hours and come home late in order for them to build this business. But my children,
They just sound money.
I mean, trust fund babies, right? They just sound money. So there's absolutely no way you'd expect that this child understand what it took for this wealth to be built. So what Olive is saying, communicate, have a plan. And this also builds to a very common conversation nowadays, legacy. What is your legacy? Is your legacy chaos? Like, that's what you've chosen, right? So it's very important to think about beyond, because when you talk about legacy, a lot of people just think about how much wealth am I going to accumulate for my children? But then after you've accumulated, how is it going to be passed on down to them? Because it's very possible for you to play role number one of accumulating and them not enjoying a single cent of that money. So legacy is an action word, right? Action in that you're doing and you're consulting someone. And then there's something that you mentioned that piqued my interest, where you said, how long do you want to continue providing for your beneficiaries? And I thought, like, yeah, maybe I have a child and I want to provide to them up to the age of 25. After that, I want them to be independent. Right? Like, I don't have to provide for them until they're 50 because I don't want to instill laziness, or maybe I want them, right? Because there are kids out here, trust fund babies, just like this person, even they're not processed, is very delulu, right? So yeah, it's very important to think about. And it makes also your point very deep in that this thing is something you can custom make. You can decide, this is how I want everything of mine to go. And that's very, very important, taking charge of your life. Finally, Wamuyu, after all these lessons, what is your parting shot in this estate planning conversation? Based on your experience especially.
Yes, I think at this point, I don't think there's anybody who has been listening to this conversation from the beginning to here who has not understood why it's important to do this, or why it's important we're having this discussion. We cannot overemphasize this.
Yes.
And especially for me, I'll come back to the chaos, especially because what we're talking about, when Olive was talking about taking an inventory and just where is the paperwork?
Yes.
Does it make sense? Is it adding up?
And you said that
Because
so many of our videos. Where is the paperwork?
Where is the paperwork? Because the chaos that we experience every time a client comes through the succession, now that's intestate succession, where now somebody passed on without an estate plan, because they'll come and they'll tell you, our dad passed on, we've gone through his drawer or wherever he kept his documents, whether it's a box, whatever, and this is what you found. So you'll find bits and pieces of things. You'll find a copy of title, a copy of a very old copy of title. You don't know, is this title, is there an original? Did he sell it? Is it still in his name? You don't know where to start. You'll find a share certificate. You wouldn't even know, okay, was this land? Does this share certificate, is it for land? Is it for what? Are these circle benefits? What is it? Most times you cannot put 1 + 1 together to see what are we dealing with. Because when you come for intestate succession, we tell you, make us a list of the assets and liabilities. People can barely give you a list because they don't know what is what. They're finding bits and pieces here and there, and it's so hard to bring them together. And this has happened as recently as last year. I lost an uncle, and yeah, we're still struggling with putting together those pieces together. So, and the challenge with some of these things, first, it prolongs grief even, because
Oh my goodness.
it really does prolong grief, because as you put all these things together, it takes so long.
Yeah.
And the longer it takes for you to figure things out, the longer, of course, you're not able to move on. Yeah. So I think from this, we cannot overemphasize on estate planning. Just get it together.
Yeah.
Just get it together. Just get it together. I mean, it in the long run, because if it's about legacy, you cannot have lived a very good life for 60, 70 years I mean, we saw you as this respectable person. You know, you did all this for your family. And then now, once you pass on for the next 10 years, your family is the home for chaos.
And we have examples that where so many people will tell you there's a family they used to admire when they were children, right? Because of how the kids dressed, the trips they took, they were so well put together. And then one parent died. And then
The chaos started. Everything unraveled.
Yeah, because now, you know, we have children coming up. Nobody knows whether this child that is being brought, being told, you know, this is your child. Do we now start exhuming the body to confirm paternity?
yeah.
I mean, the chaos, you know, you don't want to live a very good 70-year respectable life. And then the next 10 years, it's just your home is just the home of chaos. In-laws, what, children, people who are saying they were your spouses, nobody knows them. No, you know, just get it together. I think that's the bottom point. Just
Yeah.
get it together.
It's like death will come to each and every one of us.
And it's a matter of when, not if. They all die. Honestly, if you're in your 60s, 70s, okay, well, we all pray for long life. But you know, when you get to a certain point and you start getting certain conditions, you know this is a matter of time.
Yeah.
So why do you want to wait until?
Yeah. That's true.
So
I
to add on what Wamuyu has said, there's something my mom says a lot. She says, you're not ready to live until you're ready to die. Be ready to live. Be ready to die, and then you will live. Because if
you're not ready to live until you're ready to die. Wow, that's so powerful.
she says that a lot, and the thing here is thinking about death can be daunting and very, very uncomfortable for a lot of us. And even me thinking about my own death, thinking about the death of my parents is very uncomfortable and daunting. But if we don't think about it, then the daunting, it is rather that I feel uncomfortable right now, rather than feel uncomfortable, I am grieving. I don't know where to start. My children don't know where to start. So let us just prepare. Let's prepare. Let us live by being ready to die. Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a strong thing to say. That's such a powerful thing. That is true. And it's like the only way out of these situations is doing it.
Yeah.
We can't sweep it under the carpet, right? And bury our hands under the sun. So yeah, so thank you, ladies. That was such a powerful conversation. I'm so happy to have had you, Olive, on board. Today it was just me and Mamoya. So the question is now that you are advocates and you do estate planning on a day-to-day basis. So if I wanted to come to you, if tribers actually wanted to come to you, and Mamoya, you know, they come to you a lot, right? So if they want to come to you again for estate planning, where can they find you?
Okay, we have offices in town. We are located at View Park Towers, A floor, Transcon office suites. So when you come there, ask for Wamuyu, ask for Olive or Wanjiku, you can find us. We also have an email address. Our email address is info@wanjikukanyere.com. info@wanjikukanyere.com. You can also reach us on phone, or whether, you know, by a call or on WhatsApp. For me, you can reach me on 0715 93 4413. 0715 93 4413. But all this information is going to be put in the description box, and Wanjiku can also give you her number in case you'd want to reach her directly. Yeah.
So if you want to reach me directly, my number, you can reach me on WhatsApp, you can call me. My number is 0716 523959. 0716 523959.
And as we end this conversation, I just want to say to Wamuyu and Olive, congratulations on starting your business. As a woman, I'm so proud of you guys. And it's such an awesome thing for me to host women on my platform, because it's like you it's coming together, because my business offers this and your business offers that, and so it's such a beautiful thing to watch. And I hope you'll stick here for many years to come. I do not want ever another lawyer to sit here because you closed your business after you talked to us about legacy planning. So you have a very big responsibility on your shoulders. Yeah. All right. And with that, my name is Agatha from the Wealth Tribe, and this is where you learn how to build wealth together.